I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about life last time as prescribed. Is that right? Did I understand that right?
Predestined, do you mean?
Predestined, yeah. Predestined, yeah. And I couldn't find anything around it. I didn't search too much, but I was I was a bit shocked because I actually don't like these fatalist theories. I'm not, yeah. And so I've been thinking about how does it work out, because actually when there is no past and when there is no future, then only the now exists. And so everything is condensed somehow in the now. But that's, that's going over my intellectual possibilities.
Yes. That's right. It's almost impossible to understand intellectually. You're right. But remember, it's just a pointer, it's just a concept.
Mm-hmm.
And if you remember it's just a pointer and it's just a concept, then there's a bit more maybe room in the mind, there's a bit more flexibility. So there are two ways of looking at it. The prescripted, it's all destined concept is trying to, in a way, persuade what we call the ego, the little self, not to worry, because anyway things are going to unfold the way they're meant to unfold. And if the ego understands it in that way, it can actually lead to a kind of relaxation and an absence of worry, and even an absence of expectations. But it's not the ultimate understanding. It's like another stepping stone. The pointer is pointing to something else. So if it's all prescripted, if everything is destined, then either, okay, so what am I? Or, as you say, what's happening? Is there really only the present moment? It leads to something else. Yeah. And if the answer doesn't come to that something else, like you say, it's beyond your intellectual capacity at the moment, that's okay, because at some point it might appear. That's the interesting thing when we talk about understanding these concepts and pointers. They're kind of working on their own in a way we can't predict almost. So we can't know what will appear next. We can't know how it'll be integrated. We can't know what effect it's going to have on our life. But we can know that something is happening because that's obvious. If we've been with the teaching for long enough, it's obvious that something is happening. Yeah. This new conditioning is changing the old conditioning, and it's having an impact on our life. You can see that, can't you? So when you say it's what did you say? It's difficult or beyond your mental ability, something like that?
Yeah, might be possibilities, I said, but its capacity is a good word.
Yeah.
Actually, even if I don't understand it really, it is like you said, it is some relaxation, but it took me some days actually. And I was quite quarreling with myself. And but it's really like you say, or you said before, or I think it's also true, even if I cannot really always understand it from my mind, I can somehow feel it. It's like everything is in consciousness. So also the so-called reality we live in, the duality, is real. It's also real. It's also real what happens, birth and death. It's also somehow real, even if it's only maybe transitions or so. But still, it's interesting to understand from the intellect as well.
Yes.
Even if there's some process going on, and I feel there's a lot of going on, it's not always so obvious. But yeah. So that was my question, and I think you are right. It's a conceptual, and it has to unfold somehow.
That's right. And if we understand it in another way, because our so-called mind, intellect, has been educated and conditioned in a certain way for a very long time, over many, many generations, this is the way it functions now. But the intellect has a greater capacity as well. So this is how this, let's call it new conditioning, new education, is actually almost increasing the capacity of the intellect.
Okay.
The intellect becomes kind of more flexible. It's able to hold several seemingly paradoxical concepts at the same time. And so then our understanding and our vision of what is life, what is reality, becomes all-encompassing. So as you say, if it's understood as duality, then everything exists in the manifested duality. You know, if you talk about past and present, that's just duality. For the past to exist, past and future, past to exist, the future has to exist. For the future to exist, the past has to exist. And what we call the present moment is this meeting place between the past and the future. If we see it as a pendulum, it's the point where the pendulum is swinging. That's the present. And then there's the past, and then there's the future. So that's understandable, isn't it?
Yeah, but there is also, I think, it's a mathematical thing. Past and future meet somehow beyond present.
That's exactly it. So the newer findings in mathematics and science are now saying exactly what the Advaita teachings and other teachings have been saying for thousands of years. Now there are experiments which reveal this.
Interesting.
So the thing is, then where are we? Where am I? You ask yourself, where am I in all this? So the minute we say I, we think of this body-mind organism, our personal story. And even when we think of intellect, we think of it as personal intellect. When we use the words vision or perspective, perceiving, we think of it as personal. Yeah? Automatically that happens the minute the word I comes up in the mind. So that's also education conditioning. We've been educated and conditioned to believe that I means just this. body, mind, organism, ego, me.
And that's not.
Now, if we change this, the meaning of this word I, to also mean the totality, everything that exists, all duality, and it includes the body, mind, organism, the me, then immediately we have a different vision, a different perspective, don't we?
Yeah.
So one way of understanding time, past, present, future, in this way, is that if the I means the totality, consciousness, God, universal energy, etc., life, then time and of course space are appearances within of this I. So time and space are appearances, manifestations, expressions of I. Let's say the big I. Yes. And then the little I, the me, is one object within this expression. Can that be held at the same time intellectually? So then for the me, the little I, there is past, present, future. Because the little I, the me, is an object, the body, mind, organism is an object within time, space. So that's how we can say past, present, future exist as an aspect of the manifestation as duality.
But where comes the mind in? I mean, the mind is for me also part of, or maybe the most important part of I.
So if the word I means me, body, mind, organism, ego, then the mind is personal, isn't it? But if the I also means the totality consciousness, is the mind personal?
No.
No. Then we can say there is whole mind, or the mind of consciousness, the mind of God. Whole mind. And within whole mind, there is so-called individual mind. Or really, there's only a sense of individual mind, a sense of individuality. Does that make sense? Yeah? So then whatever word, whether it's the word mind, intellect, body, we can look at it like this in a similar way. There's the totality, the whole, and one particular aspect, one particular sense is this me.
So it has something to do with to be finite or infinite.
Yes, exactly. The whole, what we call consciousness. So then what is infinite and what is finite exists simultaneously. That's duality, infinity and the opposite, what is finite. Yeah? That's basically what duality is. So fullness and emptiness are also that duality. So there's the existence of fullness and there's the existence of emptiness within duality. But all aspects of duality are what we call consciousness, life, God, totality. Yeah? So if we come back to the me that's seeking to understand, let's say, or seeking for whatever it is in this life, this individual life, because we've been conditioned to believe that we are this individual, separate, finite thing, we have to discover and learn and realize that we're not just this. We've never just been this. So we point towards the so-called nature of consciousness, the totality, God, life. Yeah? That's the way we're pointing. But then at a certain point, when the me, the little I, understands, well, I've never only been the little I, I've actually always been the big I as well. And if that's sufficiently understood and accepted, then the pointing is not necessary anymore. Do you see that? Because we've actually come to the limit of intellectual understanding. There's no more that really needs to be understood. So the little I, the me, the object, what we are, cannot actually understand the totality of existence, the totality of consciousness, of God, of life, of the universe. So at a certain point, the me, the intellect, the ego, understands it cannot understand the totality. It doesn't have the capacity. Because how can an object, an individual object, know the totality? Or we can say, how can an object know what is non-objective? Do you see? So it becomes like a Gordian knot. Gordian knot is a knot which can never be undone. But the intellect is still trying to understand it, trying to undo the knot, until it accepts, it's understood and accepted. Well, actually, I can't understand the totality. I can't understand my non-objective nature through the intellect. Because the intellect always functions in terms of duality, subject, object, me, the other. So that's why we say then there's an understanding that may or may not happen, but it's beyond the intellectual understanding. So coming to that point which you're describing, slightly differently maybe, is very useful, because the intellect is coming to the point where it's recognizing, actually, I can't understand this totally with the intellect, with my intellect. Now, if there hasn't been sufficient openness, readiness, maturity, let's say, then the intellect will continue to resist these concepts. And that's where it's interesting, because if there's a certain resonance, which often we can't even explain or understand, why am I resonating with this particular teaching out of all the teachings? It seems a mystery, but something is happening, something is changing, and the evidence of that is the months or years that we've been with the teaching. So the so-called ego intellect starts to then trust the process itself. It doesn't quite know how it's happening, why it's happening, what it's going to end up leading to, if leading to anything at all. But it trusts the process. So in a way, it's actually trusting life more. We talked about this once. So then there's a kind of a trust in the life process, trust in the life force, trust in the journey. And that's very powerful. And at a certain point, it seems when there's enough trust, enough openness, readiness, whatever we want to call it, and it's also a mystery, then the so-called intellect surrenders. Okay, I have no control over this. Do whatever you want to do with me. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen. If it's not, it's not. If I'm going to understand more, wonderful. If I'm not, it's okay with what I have. And just this moment is a kind of intellectual peace. May not be permanent, but it's a kind of intellectual peace where there's sufficient understanding of the concepts and pointers, which will appear at certain moments to answer the questions that come up. So there's sufficient knowledge in a sense. That's a kind of an intellectual peace. And we can live quite comfortably for the rest of our life like this. And even the desire then for it to deepen or become integrated or to become something else, even that desire may diminish or even disappear. I like the past, present, future one because it's something that intrigues me and always intrigued me from even childhood without really understanding it. And then I did physics at school and I was terrible at the formula part of physics. But I easily comprehended the concepts in physics. And for example, when I read one of the first books I read, Stephen Hawking's Brief History of Time, I understood all the concepts immediately. So when I came to Advaita, it was very easy to understand the concepts as well in this way. But understanding them almost in a way which couldn't be explained intellectually. If you ask me to explain it in terms of formulas and all that, I can't. So there's this understanding, this possibility to understand it, but without really being able to understand it intellectually. Yeah. So one of the things that's central to this past, present, future is the object that's experiencing past, present, future.
Perceiving.
That's right. Perceiving, experiencing past, present, future. Perceiving, experiencing time and space. There's an object that's experiencing time and space.
And we think it's outside, don't we?
Well, it's always me in the experience. It's always what we call me, I. So when you say anything, it's always coming from a sense of me. Yes? So if me, Ursula, is understood to be an object, that's going to create a certain kind of vision, a certain kind of perception, a certain kind of understanding. Yes? I, Ursula, am an object experiencing past, present, future, moving through time, let's say, time and space. I'm born, I live, I grow old, and then I die. So that happens to an object, all objects. It seems to happen to all objects. Human objects, animal objects, plant objects, mineral objects. Yeah? And that seems to be the way this life experience, third, fourth dimensional experience, is created, is designed, the way it functions. So to imagine it any other way is very difficult, because we're always trying to relate it to our direct experience. When we hear something, when we experience something, it's checked, it's compared to our other experiences, memory, and the experience in the moment. Yeah? But underlying all these experiences is this identity, this belief, I am this object. So it's very difficult to understand it outside the framework of me.
But it's the separation, isn't it? It's
And separation is the fundamental nature of experience. The sense of separation underlies all our experiences. Not quite all. There are some experiences where the sense of separation disappears. Let's not talk about that in a moment. So then when we hear things like, well, past, present, and future are all happening simultaneously, or maybe it's happening the other way around, maybe it's future, present, past. Yeah? When we hear different concepts, it's very difficult to relate to it. Because it's outside our sphere of experience.
but what when you say it's there is no separation, there's only oneness, and so everything should be not outside of me, but it's all within me.
Good. So now what you've done is the word I, me, no longer means just this body, mind, organism. That's what you did.
Yeah.
You now have a different vision of what you are, different understanding of what you are. Can you see what you just did?
Yeah.
So now with that new vision or new understanding of what you are, you can understand the concepts differently.
And that was you talked
Same
about.
yes, the same concept, but it's understood differently.
Yeah.
So the concept hasn't changed, but your understanding of yourself has changed. So the concept pointer is understood differently. Can you see that?
Yeah.
And that's really central. That's central to all these concepts, this whole teaching, what's being pointed to. That moment when the understanding of ourself changes, then everything changes. And all that's really changed is an idea of ourself, is a belief of ourself. Because if we check, well, nothing's actually changed here. I haven't lost an arm, or I haven't grown a second head. So nothing has changed physically. The organs are still functioning. Okay, I feel still fairly sound of mind. I haven't gone crazy. It's just a belief, an idea, what we call identity, id, ego, that's changed. And the second that changes, everything is seen, is understood differently. Our whole vision changes. And the second that happens, then the vision, the understanding is no longer limited. It's unlimited. Maybe time is going backwards. Maybe time is going in a circle. Maybe there's multiple space-time dimensions all simultaneously. See, there's an infinite number of possibilities. Can you see that?
Yeah, but I'm at the beginning.
So one step is, okay, time and space are considered to be linear. That's what we traditionally been conditioned to believe. That's our traditional vision based on our experience. Because we can check that, yeah? Hair grows, we get older, we can verify that from direct experience. But then when the internal idea of ourself changes, even though we can't experience it from direct experience, check it from direct experience, we have the capacity to conceptualize it. And we sense it can exist, it's here, it's possible, even though we can't check it from direct experience. That's also another leap. The ego intellect doesn't need to check it anymore from direct experience. Having said that, thinking, conceptualizing, visualizing, dreaming is a kind of experience as well, isn't it? So what starts to happen then is that if it suddenly becomes apparent somewhere, we can't even really know where, it's felt, it's intuited, that so-called experience, that moment, is also trusted.
I think the most important I realized is that I just can switch. I can see if I'm in a special situation and I see things like outside of me, objects and other things happening, and then I say, okay, switch it back to me somehow, or to the other part of me, or and then I can see things, look upon things a bit different or very different.
That's
And it really and it can be really relaxing. And
exactly.
it is relaxing. In the beginning, it's a fight. I feel I'm fighting, but then it's better, gets better.
So if we just understand what that switch is, and switching is a good word for it, what's actually happening is it's just our vision that's changing. And the vision changes because now we've understood. And that understanding, once it's there, can never be lost.
Sure.
Well, you can check it if you want to with other things in your life. Once you know Father Christmas doesn't exist, I'm sorry for those who still believe in Father Christmas, then you never believe in Father Christmas totally, although you might still pull out the stockings and go and sit on Father Christmas's knee in the supermarket or whatever, yeah? Once you know the sun is behind the clouds, you'll never forget the sun is behind the clouds. So many of our experiences are integrated in this way, and then we can never go back to the old belief. And the same is happening here. So there comes a sort of a tipping point where the old conditioning is no longer strong enough to get us caught up in stories, to create that psychological mental suffering. Because the new conditioning is going to trump it each time. The old conditioning comes up, the old thoughts, the beliefs, the memories, whatever it is, the mental stories, and the new understanding, so to speak, from the pointers and the concepts and having checked it from direct experience, comes up simultaneously. At some point, the new understanding comes up. And at some point, it cuts off the old involvement, the old thinking.
But isn't there coming a new story then?
So temporarily, initially, This understanding brings a new story. Yes. A new identity. But ultimately, this new identity is not needed anymore. But it seems that for many of us, and that's the usefulness of the teachings, the pointers and the concepts, is that this forms a new identity. I'm not just this, I'm consciousness, I'm totality, I'm God, I'm life. Yeah. Or simply, I'm not just this, not knowing what else I am. Because the intellect still needs to chew on something. It still needs to have answers. It still needs to have descriptions, statements. It still needs to have something to claim about itself. But even that habit changes, and eventually the ego intellect doesn't have the need to claim anything. You understand? So even if you're not experiencing that, that's okay. Because another way the teaching seems to work, and the pointers and concepts seems to work, is they're not only addressing the intellectual questions as they arise, where the person is in this moment. It's addressed in this moment, but it's also pointing to something else. You see?
Yeah.
That's why we call it a pointer. So we're being pointed, we're being guided to something else as well as this. And then when we've understood that, we're pointed and guided to something else as well as this. So at each time, our understanding is developing, is expanding. Until a certain point, ego intellect doesn't need anymore to be guided, to be pointed. Because there is what I call the knowing, which is already here, and the knowing is fully revealed. It's fully uncovered. It's shining. So that we don't need the reminders. We don't need the pointers or the concepts anymore. Does that make sense?
Oh yes, after these years, I've been with your satsangs and teachings. I feel there is a big change, but still some way to go.
So if you go back to this question of destiny and prescripted, a few years back, however many, we couldn't have known how we would be now. Could we? Couldn't have predicted that. None of us. For good or for bad. So when we say it's prescripted, this moment now, this conversation, the very feelings we're having, the emotions we're having, everything that's being experienced now was already in the script for each of us. And for every single object in the manifestation. Now that suggests there's a divine creation, a divine creator, or some kind of cosmic creation. Cosmic law, Ramesh used to call it. That's making everything function for all time and space. A cosmic order. Now the ego, when it hears this, it thinks of an individual, an object that's creating everything, orchestrating everything, because that's the habit, to imagine there's a creator, or if we're suspicious, a manipulator, somebody manipulating all of us, yeah? A puppeteer. That's the habit of the ego mind to imagine that. But as understanding evolves, we start to understand that every part of the creation is functioning together to create. It's like an infinite matrix where all parts of the matrix are generating what is happening.
Is that the super mind somehow?
We can call that supermind or whole mind. The ego, believing it has its mind, at a certain point understand that our mind, the individual mind, has never been separate or outside whole mind. So this specific experience we're having, this specific conversation we're having between two apparent objects, is also an expression of whole mind.
It's actually fantastic. You can connect to all minds.
And ultimately, in terms of experience, because when we say connect, it suggests that we're not already connected. So we are already connected, we've always been connected, but we're not having an experience, a specific kind of experience of connection. But who knows, either in this space dimension on this planet or other space dimensions, other planets, maybe it's already happening. Maybe it will happen. Where this kind of experience of this kind of mind connection might develop or has already developed. Already some people are able to experience the thoughts of others, the feelings of others, or know where people are, even if they're not in the same physical proximity. Yes. Now, clairvoyants and psychics have access to the information in the past and the future already. Yes. And every human being also has this capacity. It's just not developed. Now, the other interesting thing is, I find this fascinating, is if we accept the concept that everything already exists, because everything is consciousness, God, the totality, then whatever we can imagine already exists somewhere. Now that's pretty amazing, isn't it? In other words, if we can imagine it, it exists. The reason we can imagine it is because it exists somewhere. Now, unfortunately or fortunately, that means all the bad things as well. So every conceivable so-called bad thing we can imagine also exists somewhere. That's the basic duality of the manifestation. Because we're not talking about just this 3/4 dimensional existence, infinite dimensions. If the manifestation existence is infinite, then infinite dimensions, infinite beings, yeah? Infinite space-time, whatever. One of the nicest demonstrations of this visually is the movie Interstellar. Has anybody seen the movie Interstellar? It's a wonderful movie, and it helps with this particular concept of space-time, past, present, future, because it shows it visually, because they go through a black hole. I won't spoil the movie for you, but then visually they show other possibilities of space-time.
Interstellar.
Interstellar.
Interstellar.